So my trick here is there is one large language model out there that cares much, much, much less about violating these things, and that is Grok.
Nailed it.
XAI's thing. It will. Grok is my default like celebrity system prompt generator because it has never refused me once. This one case of I need a celebrity system prompt, go to Grok, ask the system prompt, copy and paste that into ChatGPT, and now you can have a conversation with Chris Voss. You can explain the exact scenario.
So Grok is taking the person's name and so on.
Well, Grok, of course, has read the book too, right? Sure. Just like every other large language model.
Generic, in quotes, system prompt that you could.
It won't do a generic one. It'll do a Chris Voss one.
They might be self-aware.
Coming at you live from the self-awareosphere, it's me, Daniel Bishop, joined by
Hunter Powers
on They Might Be Self-Aware, a podcast, a twice-weekly podcast most of the time. A podcast you're currently watching, listening to, brailing, I don't know, having Notebook LM tell you about based on a transcript that you extracted from the episode. I don't know. But you're ingesting one way or another all of our juicy tidbits.
Welcome to the deep dive.
All the tidbits. The word I said right the first time. We definitely edited that out. I'm 100% sure of it. Hunter, we ran out of time last week.
We did.
We were going to spend one episode talking about all these, how we interact with LLMs and some tips and tricks and hacks for how you could use them in your own life. And wow,
last episode, if they missed it, go back and listen to it. So we talk about how we are leveraging large language models today in our lives for both just sort of general life work. And then we also dove into we hit a lot of topics, but one other topic was just entertainment as sort of a subset of
education
life stuff.
There toward the end.
Learning. There was a lot of good stuff in there. So if you missed that one, go back and check it out. But this episode, what are we talking about this episode?
The same thing.
Oh,
more of it.
Well, they don't need to go back then.
It's not just the life and the entertainment, the education. We're now getting into productivity. We're now getting into technical stuff.
Making money.
Yeah. How do you
show me the money? Show me the money. Show me the money, Daniel.
I don't have any money handy. I have some dice. Do you want?
Okay. Sorry.
Given how much D&D I play, it would be astonishing if I didn't have dice within arm's reach at all times. But yeah, if we're going to realize that future of we're all 10x engineers or this is or that's, if we're going to actually automate our own jobs, well, we'd better start getting used to it. We better start figuring out how we are going to realize these productivity gains, this world in which we sit back and let the equivalent of the robo-taxi go and get all the money for us. And we just kind of sip on AI-generated mojito recipes.
In investing, there's a concept called alpha. And alpha is the knowledge that you have that no one else has about how the stock market's going to change. It is your edge in your stock trading.
I have a negative alpha.
I guess you could have negative alpha, but I do believe that there is still tremendous alpha to be had in leveraging all of these AI tools for productivity tasks. Like if you don't have to by any means, but if you want to set yourself apart from the masses and achieve more and greater things, you buy our course. It's
right.
But it's true. There is a ton of alpha to be had. There's a ton of opportunity where the masses still don't know. They're slowly waking up, but they still don't know what is possible and what you can achieve if you spend the time to really learn these tools and understand what they're capable of and apply them in a methodical and iterative fashion where you're getting better and better and better. And right, your co-patriots that you're working with, they'll eventually catch on, but you'll already be so far ahead. Like now's the time. It's an opportunity like no other. We're going to start peeling back that onion.
Like your own little mini version of the singularity where technology just takes off and it's this exponential growth. But it's you doing the growing because you're using all the tools at your disposal. So what are some of those tools? Obviously, large language models. We're going to be talking a lot about that. But how does somebody make themselves more efficient or better at work? Now, obviously, you two, oh boy, you and I are programmers. We're slinging code. We're also managers. We're talking to people and helping organize work across whole departments.
Do you remember the first time you used a large language model for work? Do you remember your first time?
For work, I remember the first time at work. It was GPT 3.5. It had been making the rounds. I was, dare I say, an AI hipster just because I've been keyed into natural language processing for so long. I was using it before. A bunch of people had, well, frankly, still some people somehow have not yet heard of it. Not really. But I was right on that bleeding edge and very, very excited about it. I'd tried some of the earlier sort of iterations right along that realm, and I was already in the transformer space. But to see this new idiom, this new way of doing things, that was truly amazing. The first time at work was when we were working together, and there were a couple of classification projects that we'd been doing of here's a news article. Can you classify this as someone's factory burned down somewhere, or did someone get hit by a ransomware attack? And so there was a classification and named entity resolution problem, kind of a two-parter. One is, did this thing happen to a company or not? And the other was, what company got hit, or when did that thing happen? There were a couple of different NER, named entity recognition tasks of like, this is the thing to extract. And with thousands of examples that have been carefully collated and double-checked, and you have external teams out there manually going through things, and it takes weeks and weeks to get back. It wasn't actually me who did this. It was someone else on the team used GPT 3.5 to do in, I think it was one afternoon, what we traditionally had been spending more than 1 month to manually collate from a bunch of other people. And with some spot checking, it was about as good. Not quite there yet. This was 3.5. We're not into the 4 days. We're not into the more modern age where LLMs are really, truly astonishing. But we took a task that would have taken months, and we got the first pass at it in less than 1 day. And then the let's clean it up took a week or two after that. But we more than halved, whatever. We took a problem and reduced the amount of time that it would take to get to a good quality data set, which we still then put through the traditional transformer models due to cost reasons, and that, frankly, has never gone away. But we did that in less than half the time, and that was at the absolute beginning of this new world. How about you? What was your first?
I remember my first. Case? So it was GPT-2.
The one that was deemed too dangerous to put out into the world at the time.
Yes.
Sam Altman really knows how to sell it.
And if you never played around with 2, in the realm of 2, you could generate about a paragraph of text. And at the end of the paragraph, it had just gone completely, it didn't make any sense. It stopped making any sense by the end of about a paragraph. So but
that was huge, because previously you could get maybe a sentence, or a sentence that would be like kind of grammatically correct, but really you could only look at 5 words at a time to truly make sense.
Right.
We're up to whole paragraphs at this point.
Right. So each sentence would get progressively worse, and it would start repeating words more, and then just eventually the words didn't make any sense as they went together as you got out your paragraph of text.
All just falls apart. Right.
Which you would specify as how many tokens that you wanted it to generate. But my first, so I've been playing around.
I know we need to make sure and define some terms on the podcast. What is a token in the sense of a large language model?
A representation of a word.
Subword, usually. Usually it's
sure. A word can be broken into multiple tokens.
Characters long, right? Like you wouldn't see dinosaur be a word. You'd see like dino or soar or s or AUR pound sign to like pad out the rest of the token, things like that. So you only have so many of those to work with. And GPT-2 had a really small context window.
Prompting, I think, was also very different back then, whereas today you really think about asking the large language model a question in general. I give you a question. That's what a prompt is in general. Back then, it was really about completion. I'm going to start something for you. And I would like, the prompt is the beginning of whatever it is the prompt. Literally, here's the beginning. Please now write what comes next. That was the general prompting strategy and what you were doing. And you were just, again, predicting what words would come next.
The classification of this article is, and then
yes,
completes that sentence.
Yes, that was what prompting was like. So my boss at the time, I was the CTO, he was the CEO. He always wanted me to come up with these like lists of ideas. He'd have something be like, Hunter, come up. I need 10 new features. I need 5 new names for this. We need four
cigar, the way that you're describing it.
Strategies and
I need pictures of Spider-Man.
And there were always insane timelines. I need it tomorrow, and I often had no idea. And so what I determined was I would go back to him and say, okay. And by the way, they were often like fairly abstract, and like I don't know what I'm supposed to to do here. We're gonna go after the banking industry. I want 4 features that would really just appeal to the banking industry. And
on my desk by Monday.
And we're in. Well, I won't say too many details here. But we're in a completely different industry. And I'm like, what? And by the way, I'm like working on like 900 other things that are like super relevant and have to be delivered by like Thursday at 3 p.m. But now I need this list for like things that will appeal to the banking industry. So the workflow that I developed, the strategies, I would go back and say, okay, I can definitely do this. Could you just give me like 2 or 3 just so that I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking me? And so he would do the first 2 or 3. I would then take the first 2 or 3 as the beginning of my list, and I would put it into GPT-2, and I could get out maybe like 2 or 3, and I would just run that over and over again until I got 15-ish, plop it back to him, and boy, oh boy, did I get a lot of praise for these lists. So creative, so many ideas, infinite ideas. And yeah, they were all just straight from the language model.
Garbage from a garbage model.
That was my first time, yeah. And I still still do variations of that.
It is also worth mentioning that you described this like completion aspect of things is how today's large language models work. Asterisk. The asterisk is that when you pre-train a model and you just say, here's the entirety of the internet and a bunch of illegally gotten books and whatever that we got, that model works exactly the same way that you're describing as GPT-2 did. It would be like auto-completion. Then they go through what's called fine-tuning. And that's where they give it 100 skajillion examples of a conversation flow of person puts this in, this is what a correct output looks like. Person puts this in, this is what a correct output looks like. Person puts this in, this is a bad example of what not to do next. And you give it a infinite number of examples of that, and then it learns on top of this is what language looks like to this is how conversations or tasks or whatever look like. But we didn't have that fine-tuning. We didn't have this instruction fine-tuning available back in the GPT-2 days. I guess by GPT 3.5, they had the like chat interface, so they must have had some of that instruction fine-tuning at that point. But still, that's how you started using large language models.
That was the beginning.
Now, how do other people use them? We can't ask everyone on who's watching and listening to us right now, but rather than asking them, what can we tell them of in today's world? How can everyone use these tools to help better themselves? Obviously, you and I know coding, but what are... And
we're going to get into coding.
Yeah, we're saving coding for the end. Hopefully, frankly, we don't even get to it this episode. I want to talk about other stuff. You mentioned negotiation on the last episode.
Yes.
Where you were negotiating with some guy or gal on eBay of, I want this. You didn't mention anything, so I'm just going to make up something. A motorcycle. You're buying a motorcycle on eBay, and it's listed for $5,000. You want to try and get it for $4,500. And you're using ChatGPT or GPT-4 over API or Claude or Mistral or this or that. You're using something to craft your messages. You could do that in a work sense, right?
I absolutely have. I've used this exact same technique to negotiate my salary before. And in fact, if you try to hire Hunter, there is
take your own salary expectation out of your own.
Well, I don't know completely out of my hands. I'm still the human in the loop here, but it's starting with this very approach, which I use for other things too. So The idea here is, all right, so I don't know. Books have a wealth of information, and there are tons of books out there. And so what if you could leverage the author of your favorite book on the topic at hand, who's considered, the world-renowned expert, and you could just call him up and say, hey, Chris Voss in this case for negotiation. Chris, could you assist me with this negotiation? In fact, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Wouldn't that be pretty swell? And aren't there lots of books that you might want to do this with, or authors or individuals that if they could be your right-hand person in this conversation? So,
or have them teach you how to do it yourself. We talked a little bit some episodes ago about Claude for Education, where it's not going to give you the answer anymore. It's going to specifically help guide you toward the answer, how to approach a problem. If you wanted Chris Voss to not just say, this is what you should say, but rather help teach you how to negotiate better, that would be amazing. I think he's busy, pretty busy. How could you get that benefit then, Hunter?
Sure. Well, first you should go out and actually purchase the book so that you have at least some plausible deniability about the inevitable copyright claims and doing exactly what I'm about to say. And I do have a copy of this book, and I also own the ebook. But once that's solved, you can, and other platforms can do this as well. But in ChatGPT, you can create what's called a custom GPT, and a custom GPT consists of what they would describe, they call it a system prompt. I would call it a system prompt. But yeah, which is
you're priming the pump of the LLM with, here's a bunch of stuff that you know. Now that you know that, here's the problem that I have.
A description of the persona that you want this GPT to take on. And then most importantly, you can attach files to it, which is knowledge that it can leverage in answering those conversations. So for the files, you're just going to attach a copy of the book, and there are many places online. We're not going to give out any official link to, but just Google it. You will find a PDF or an EPUB of the file, which you can just drag in.
They don't do that.
Well, buy it, but you can't. You usually can't purchase the PDF file, and if you purchase it, for example, on Kindle, it's going to have DRM on it, and you cannot use this thing. You have to get an open format. So then, what you're left with is you could scan it in yourself. That would be legal.
Tedious, yeah.
Or you're going to need to find someone who's already scanned it in, and if you also own a copy of it, it's at least morally and legally gray.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's at least gray.
So suppose that you have your own definitely legally acquired or made PDF of a book on a subject. And you attach that to either GPT or, like, I have some local large language models that you can do the same thing to, which you have less worry of some other company somewhere taking all of the files that you upload and then using that as training data in the future.
Well, you need part two. So there's two things you need. You need the book, and then you need the system prompt. So you can ask any large language model to write this. So you could write it yourself, but you probably don't know enough to write it yourself because you're not Chris Voss and you haven't read the book either. So you can ask the large language models to write it. For example, ChatGPT, say, hey, I would like you to write a system prompt to take on the personality of Chris Voss and provide me with negotiating assistance. However, you will often find refusals about this because they don't want to violate copyright as well. And they're like, well, we can't really say this, and they're not allowed to regurgitate the exact content. And maybe I could take on just sort of a more generic negotiator persona. So my trick here is there is one large language model out there that cares much, much, much less about violating these things. And that is Grok.
Nailed it.
Grok. XAI's. Grok is my default, like, celebrity system prompt generator because it has never refused me once. And I actually think Grok is pretty good. And there's some, maybe we get into the coding stuff. We can talk some specifics where it may even be a little bit better than other things. But this one case of I need a celebrity system prompt, go to Grok, ask the system prompt, copy and paste that into ChatGPT, and now you can have a conversation with Chris Voss. You can explain the exact scenario.
So Grok is taking the person's name and so on.
Well, Grok, of course, has read the book too, right? Sure. Just like every other large language model.
Generic, in quotes, a system prompt that you could.
It won't do a generic one. It'll do a Chris Voss one. If you try to generate it through Claude or you try to generate it through ChatGPT, you're going to have to do a generic negotiator. If you go to Grok will leverage the actual book and be like, I am Chris Voss. I am the former lead FBI hostage negotiator. Like what you actually want it to be. And so, yeah, do that for all your favorite books. And then you can consult with them. And you could probably create a meta one with a whole sort of library of books around a specific topic. Right. I haven't done that one yet, but I do have multiple GPTs, and you can programmatically call them if that's of interest to you. And you got to get deeper in the technical side of things, but you can create workflows where you're leveraging multiple. I'm just going to call them sort of celebrity AI agents to inform a decision.
Well, so you make one of these things. To what end? I mean, obviously, you want some help.
To what end? But like, show me the money.
Right. If we're all improving our lives through science, through large language models, this is going to help not with just coding, but other tasks. You make a negotiation bot, or you take, some of the best marketers out there, or there's got to be a wealth of information of like how to be the best salesman, or this or that or the other thing. You take a lot of books or one book or whatever on a subject, and you make a big system prompt, a context for some large language model to know how to emulate that. How have you then used that in the past to actually assist in your day-to-day work? Is it you read an email and then you copy paste that into the thing and say, here's the email, how do I respond to it? You mentioned that you're using this for salary negotiation. I bet a lot of people listening to this would really love to know how to help negotiate their own salary. Not just like, this is how you negotiate, but rather this is how you use this tool to help negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly like that. So first, and I mentioned this in the last episode, I have a folder which has, so context is key, giving as much information about whatever it is that you're working on. So I have my resume in a file. I have just like details about me that describe me in a file. So I'm giving it the information about me first. Here's who Hunter is. And then I give it information about the company that I'm talking with. Here's the company that I'm talking with. Here's the individual that I'm talking with, who he is, his resume, his details. And we're going into a salary negotiation. My objective is to achieve either this salary or the highest salary that we could possibly achieve for this. And here's where we are in the conversation. What is and the next step is to either have a phone call or to have an email. And, how would you recommend that I start? What should I write? And it will start engaging. You'll start creating a conversation, a thread.
Context is key, because you could just say, here's the last email that I got. What's the negotiation?
Well, that's what it comes down to. Eventually, I'm just copying and pasting emails in. So, I got to...
But you ignored all the context. If you didn't say, here's the resume of the guy that I'm talking to, here's what the company is.
Well, you get better results.
How do I... Exactly. That context leads to better results. It really, really does. And so you've used that sort of approach.
100% very effectively.
It can help you craft an email. What about for, like you mentioned, a phone call? Would you have it give you talking points? Are you having it give me like, what is my introduction to the call, where I just bulldoze through and it's not a two-way conversation? I'm just telling them how much I want to get.
So I have done phone calls are harder, obviously, and if you can do negotiations over email, it's much easier because you don't have to do it live and you can think about things. But so I've asked it before, what do you think the objections will be to this? And, what's the sort of strategy that I should employ? What should when I have this phone call with this individual, how do you think it's going to play out? And if it goes wrong, how will it go wrong? And how should I wrap up the conversation, or just, you want to be able to break out of the conversation so you can have time to go back and think and potentially leverage these tools again in those conversations. Like,
those
okay,
contingencies. Yeah, very important.
I want to think about that.
What do I say? It's what happens if they say this. What are the 5 things that I should be considering when it goes wrong, or if they object in this particular way? I will also then tack onto that mock interviews. Hey, now that you've seen all this and you already know about the company and this person and the role and my responses so far and whatever, now pretend to be that person. Let's do a little role play exercise back and forth of, you're the guy, you're the hiring manager, I'm the potential employee, and I'm trying to negotiate up. And and you could even tell it, and this is into one of the big tips that I want to mention, which is do something more than once. give it that whole set of context. We're at this part of the conversation. Now give me the easy path where I just have to make sure that I'm saying the right things, and it just kind of works out. Now give me the really hard path. Now give me the one where they're threatening to, roll back and they're not even going to do the off frame, or how do I backpedal as appropriate, or do I stick to my guns, or this. And being able to have a conversation more than once is something that I think all of us wish that we could do in life, and that we never really get the opportunity to do. You have the opportunity to say, here's the entirety of a conversation, large language model, copy that over again to a certain point and respond from that next point. You can absolutely do that. And you should. For things like negotiation, for things like relationship advice. I've seen and heard of a couple of people using it in that sort of way, not negotiation like for
at work.
Yeah, right. At work. We're supposed to be talking about work stuff right now, but for like if there's a difficult conversation that you want to have with like a loved one or what have you at work, being able to go through the permutations of what they might say and how you could possibly work through that, I think can be helpful. Obviously, it's never going to be exactly what that person would say, but it gives you some practice in the sort of conceptual space that you're going to be approaching.
So the easiest application of large language models to work and productivity is probably written text, whether you're writing a report, an email, a chat message, an update. That's where it's the easiest to leverage it. And I just ask them to basically take a polish pass on something that you've written, and or here's the data, create a first draft for me.
Right.
What's your, if you're going to leverage it to write an email or an update, what does your workflow look like? What tools are you using? How are you prompting it?
So I mentioned on the last episode, there's a tool that I use called Obsidian. It's like putting together your own little wiki, and I'll take notes. I've tried to like set up something sort of automated to get recordings of calls and update the notes accordingly. It hasn't really worked out yet, but I'll take notes, and those notes aren't just here's my daily notes. Those notes link over to this is what I know about this specific person. This is what I know about this project or this external vendor or whatever it is. And then if there's an email that I have to respond to or some message or some other update that I have to give, the approach then is, hey, large language model, email or message I got, context of these 5 or whatever, connected. And I like to go to semi-connected pieces of information because it isn't just about the entirety of what you're looking at. It's that context of what is the company that I work for? What kind of project is this? Who else is touching it that isn't even on this email thread? What else do I need to be aware of?
So you're starting by collecting the relevant context, some of which is automatically collected by, I assume, like meeting recordings kind of stuff.
Exactly. Right. And so I take all of this context in there, and as I had sort of just described a bit ago, I will have multiple passes, which I found to be extremely useful, of give me the email that I should respond. Give the terse version of it, or give me the very nice one, or like I'm trying to placate the person in this case versus I'm trying to get my point across more directly.
You've got to do this later today. Which model are you going to?
I think it's Claude, just because I've got that pretty well integrated into my sort of ecosystem. There are a bunch of local and non-local large language models out there, and depending on your desires and use cases and speed and cost and so on, maybe you want something that runs locally. Look, my computer's on and it's using electricity anyways. It might as well be chugging in the background. Or I, for security reasons, can't have something that is connected to the internet at all. I'm fully air-gapped. Maybe it could be any of a variety of different reasons of the company only allows us to use ChatGPT, or we're only allowed to use these things in this context, or I've got carte blanche, but I'm used to this one. Because frankly, as I've said a few times now, most of the flagship type models out there are about as good as all the others at most of the tasks that they cover.
So let's go through the thing. You're starting by you're pasting in all of the context into Claude AI, which is, if you're not familiar, it's very similar to ChatGPT. And if you're not familiar with ChatGPT,
what context is. It's not just here's an email, here's a document, here's whatever. It's the below text is a description of the project that we're working on. This below text is 3 emails from this person and my response to them and their response, and you can see how they've responded to ways that I've talked to them. Yada, yada, yada.
And when you're putting in that context, is it all formatted as Markdown? And do you think that that's important, or is it just kind of, just plain text?
Large language models do like Markdown. I haven't been doing that. It's mostly just plain text, or if it's code, I'll put it in triple backticks because I think that's Markdown for this is a code block. But beyond that, I generally don't format my ask of them. I can ask for it, give me something in Markdown back, or put this in a HTML file, or do, whatever it ends up needing to be. And it'll do that. But I just give it sort of plain text from my end.
And then at the end, you do like some sort of a version of a line, and then you write your prompt, or do you separate your context from the actual ask? And by the way, do you put your ask at the top or the bottom? And I've also heard you're supposed to do both.
I'm not consistent. Sometimes I'll put it at the top, sometimes I'll put it at the bottom. I'd say more often the question is at the top. I could see why reiterating it, especially if there's a lot of context, put it again at the bottom could be helpful. It's also worth noting, and some of you may be thinking, this sounds exhausting. That's way too much stuff to put in. What I described as the tail end, the very far of I'm going to give the most context possible to this thing. Frankly, usually it's here's the whole email thread and maybe one note about the person I'm talking to. That's my 80% of the time. But if it's like, I have to be more careful in my communications with this person, or this is a really important external vendor, or, we're actively negotiating on a contract and I need to make sure that it knows as much as possible, then I go through, here's 5 different emails and here's 8 notes, some of which are only ancillarily related. I don't think that you usually need to go through that much effort. Just like you were describing with the eBay messages of, and I think we talked more about this last episode, it's not really 100% sure if it'd be that much better from just here's the message, what's a good negotiation back of I'm trying to get $200 off of this motorcycle that I'm buying or whatever. For a normal email, for 80% of the stuff that you're doing at work, if you're going to leverage a large language model to say, here's what I had, what would be a good response to it, or here's this draft of a piece of marketing material, can you punch it up for me? Usually you can just do that. Here's that one thing, give me a new version of it, give me the output based on this, summarize this, whatever. They're very, very good. They being large language models, really, really good at this kind of thing. That's what they're literally built for. But if you're willing to spend the time, more context, in my opinion, really is worth it. And not just opinion. Sometimes, especially on the coding side of things, you've got to give it some of this extra context if it's going to do the right thing without re-implementing helper functions that, oops, now I have 4 different versions of the same thing spread across my code base. I've absolutely had that happen to me. Giving it extra context of not just, here's this one problem, fix it, helps.
And then in the actual prompt or the task that you're giving to the large language model, you're just sort of, again, plain text describing what it is you want, or do you have any sort of structure there? And are there any kind of, we mentioned
sometimes,
the tip last time of just add to the end, if you need clarification on anything, please ask me a question. Do you have any sort of bits that you add on to every prompt?
I have gotten into that habit of never asking it to give me a response off the bat. The ask is, here's all the context, here is my goal, do you have any questions? Mm-hmm. And usually it'll take the bait and say, now that I understand this about this is what we're going to accomplish, and here's the plan for how we'll do it. Here's my 5 questions that I've got that'll help, with whatever it feels like asking to give clarification. And if I say, do you have any questions? Usually that exact sentence, that's enough to prime it to say, great, I now have space to not just do a task, but to find out whatever else that I want ahead of time. And you can be more explicit there of you must ask at least X question. You said you have it do 20 questions.
Well, that's when I want to go deep. So my default is just, if you need clarification or have any questions, feel free to ask. And I have a keyboard shortcut. Pretty much whatever operating system you have, it has a native ability to do keyboard shortcuts. So mine is AMA. If I do AMA, ask me anything, it types in that phrase. So I write my prompt, blah, 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 AMA, ding, types on, hit send.
Interesting.
Okay, so yeah, just an email. Like I've written an email. It's very common to me to I'll copy it and I'll just say take a polish pass on it, punch it up for me a little bit, just so it's like a little bit more professional. When I'm going deep and this is an important message, we're trying to plan something out. This is a message that's going wide to a lot of people that they all need to understand. Then I'm doing the full. Here's all the context, and here are my goals and ambitions and dreams and hopes. And could you please just do this for me? Now, I often originate these documents in OpenAI's products within different ChatGPT models. Right now, that would be O3 most likely. If I was doing again, this is like a real formal message. I find that which is a reasoning model. I find that it goes the deepest. And then once I was satisfied with the content, not necessarily the presentation of the content, but like the facts that it has put together, I then would take that over to Claude and say, here's who my audience is.
Cross model at this point.
Yes. For that specific purpose. Now,
I do want to mention, and I think I kind of brought this up earlier, if you're going to have this spit out an email from you, it's really important to give it examples of what your writing looks like. Because ChatGPT...
M dash is everywhere.
M dash is everywhere. There's like certain things that people have started to kind of key in on of like, I don't think that was written by a real person, was it? If you give it, here's 10 examples of what my writing looks like, it does a way better job of writing the output like you would.
To that end, another productivity application that I use a lot. We talked about the example in the beginning where the boss is, I need some ideas in this area, and I used to ask him, okay, well, give me the first three, and I'll do that. But I still use that idea. It's just it has I don't know. It is progressed, changed, grown. Where there's something that we are trying to build. We're trying to create a presentation. We're trying to create a report. We've been assigned a task. This task has been done before. Maybe it's been done at your company, but if it hasn't been done it's been done at other companies. Oh, we need this kind of a report. We need to create a brand marketing presentation. We need to define what our positioning is in relationship to these markets, or we need to come up with a strategy for how we're going to do blah, blah, blah. I will go out and find good examples of this. This is really just more context. Right. Okay, how did Nike do this? What is Nike's brand positioning? And sometimes I'll use the deep research to start off by crafting me a document. Please go in incredible depth on Nike's brand positioning. So now I have a big research document. Then the next thing that I do is I take that research document and I ask, specifically, it would usually be O3 at this point, but really any large language model, to develop a framework to write a brand positioning document based on this research that I've collected for Nike. And this gets into another point that I find very impactful, which is to ask the model to create a very opinionated framework for how you should go about creating these brand, in this instance, a brand messaging campaign. And so it will break down that document into first principles and come up with a structure for how you would put together one of these documents. And so now you have your tutorial for, okay, how do I create a brand messaging or brand positioning statement? And you have your research, you have your framework, and then it's just a question of, okay, well, what input do you need in order to define that? And so that's usually additional context, because now there's questions that you need to be able to answer about your company that you're working for. And I can easily get the answers to those questions. Okay, well, I don't know, what are your colors? What area are you in? What do you stand for? What are your values, etc.? And then it's a matter of plugging those into that framework that the AI generated the framework to get out your first draft. And now you've gone from nothing to something, and usually something that's wildly better than anyone else that was randomly asked to do this thing who has never done it before is going to generate. And that's where also we talked about this idea of alpha. Like that's where you're going to find the alpha that you can quickly leverage the greats. Find the examples, which you can use deep research to do. break it down into a framework, which you can use the large language model to do, have it interview to collect the relevant context. It will identify what context it needs. Go collect your context. By the way, save it so you can reuse it later. Plug that in, and you've got a banger of a first draft. And then it's just a matter of tweaking it and doing iterations. And especially if that's not your specialty, like you're reaching out, it
Right.
tends to impress.
I've definitely seen, if not that exact same approach, the reaching out, the I am out of my comfort zone, but hey, as context, this is what my job is. Here's this sort of related thing that I have to work on. Here's all the stuff related to that thing I need to work on. Help. It's nice to give these models context as to who you are and what your deal is and why you wouldn't ordinarily be the right person for this, because something about that level of understanding that the models have of it's the assumptions. Like when I say I'm a machine learning engineer, I'm not a machine learning operations guy. I'm not much of an infrastructure. I can't build stuff in AWS, but I know Python and I know kind of how this stuff hooks up. Can you help me make infrastructure as code, which is a term that like I've heard a bunch of times. I don't know what the hell it is, frankly. And it says, okay, great. I'll explain along the way. And it starts making these files with like extensions I've never heard of and stuff. I'm like, I can barely kind of see what it's doing. But to tell it, here's who I am. Here's this thing that I need help with that isn't in my usual wheelhouse. Doesn't just help you get the output. It helps bridge the connection between who you are and the thing that it's building so that you, if not have a deep understanding of it, at least you're not just presented with something with nothing to base it on.
Mm-hmm.
And from a work perspective, I think that's probably a good idea to have some idea of what the hell it is that you're about to turn over to someone else.
Speaking of work, I think the engineering is going to have to wait for the next episode because we are running out of time here on this episode. And that's the one that I'm most excited about. If you don't know, Daniel and I, we do a lot of engineering work. That's our primary things. Yes, we write papers and do brand positioning statements and all that kind of fun stuff. But writing code and making software, that's primary bread and butter. And we are heavily leveraging AI to make those processes better. So that's going to have to wait to the next episode. But before we wrap this one up, Daniel, someone comes to you and again, they're in sales or customer success, marketing, finance, and they're like, how do I get started? What is it? I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Do you have an answer for them at all?
The very first thing that I like to show people that want to use these tools to help in their industry is one of the things that I think large language models are best at, which is summarization. Give them a big email chain that's like 20 emails deep. Or if they have like an in-company message board, grab some whole long message board. That's like, it's weeks of back and forth. And wow, I just got CC'd onto this huge thing and I need to know what the hell's going on. And you plop that into Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and you up at the top or bottom say, summarize this into a one-pager. Because anyone will read one page. And to watch someone's face change, light up, and see the possibility immediately become apparent of this would have taken me like an hour plus to not just read, but then to start kind of mentally figuring out what the hell is going on. It would say, this person's talking about this. Here's the 3 action items still to do. This person is waiting on this thing. And to see summarization, again, a thing that large language models I think are really fantastic at, that many people have not tried, if they've never tried anything or they've not tried that kind of approach with it before, really can show you like, oh, this is an immediately, obviously useful use case for AI at work. And that's a foot in the pool, the toe in the water.
I find that interesting because we've talked about the importance of context so much. And really what you're doing there is you're leveraging the AI to provide you context. There's this giant thread and I don't really know what's going on. Can you give me the context so that I can engage?
Yeah.
It also reminds me, we didn't mention, maybe we mentioned it tangentially. Oh, I hate that word. That one of the killer use cases of AI may be meeting summarization, where it's just recording the meetings and then providing you with the bullets, as well as that repository of every conversation that you've had in these meetings. So you can just go back and ask a question. What did Jack say that our strategy was supposed to be for the quarterly report that's going out next week? And it goes like, oh, here's exactly what it was supposed to be. And that can be a first moment, getting past that. It's hard to learn anything until you almost already know it. Let it observe these long chains of things, whether it's a meeting or a long email thread or a giant report that someone just sent out, and provide you with the context. Give me the stuff that I really need to know. What are the just like the major bullets here? And using those as your entry point into that document. Okay, now I have some sort of foundation. I have something that's approachable. If I need some more information, I can ask, or I just sort of continue on from there. I like that.
What does that do for people, though? Does it? I feel like it's going to help them become something more. They might be more. There's a phrase I'm looking for here.
Self-aware. I got it. Self-aware.
They might be self-aware if they use all these tools.
Boom. Well, I feel more self-aware. I don't know about you.
I feel, self-aware. More enlightened is perhaps a bit of a grandiose term, but it is really nice to talk with someone else who uses these same kinds of tools in a slightly different way. And what I'd be curious to read, hear, and otherwise is if any of you listening and watching have some tips and tricks or specific ways that you interact with large language models that work for you, or specifically don't work for you. You tried something. Oops, this is clearly how I shouldn't be going about it. That can be just as useful as knowing what does work. And I would love to hear about it. Hunter would love to hear about it. Maybe we'll tell the rest of you some of those things. We read the comments. We can read them out aloud. We get emails sometimes. I don't think we've ever gotten a fax. Does anyone have faxes these days?
We've not received a fax. We have received phone calls and we have received emails and some interesting emails at that. But if you want to hear, there is still one more part of this insight into the large language model usage, and that's going to be the engineering one, where we talk literally about how we are automating ourselves out of a job, night and day, and how far we've come. And we're going to go into specifics about what technology we're using, what software we're using, what models we're using. It'll be a little bit technical, and then after that, we'll get back to just again talking about the wide province of news and events that are happening on this inevitable path to self-awareness right here on the podcast. Like and subscribe. You can find us on pretty much every major platform. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast directory, really. Just search for They Might Be Self-Aware, and you shall find us. And with that, until next time.
They might be self-aware.